All right, we're going to reconvene at 12:55, and we're going to move swiftly and see if we can't finish early after taking into account all the public comments and the comments from the board but on the draft RIPA report. We will need to pause whenever LaWanda comes in, and we do have one formal action we need to take for sure when we have quorum. And so when she arrives, we may pause to do that. But for now, we will turn to agenda item number 8, board discussion of the 2020 draft RIPA report. We were given a wonderful update on the stop data part of the report. I invite my fellow board members to continue to provide comment on that part of the report, but we also have additional parts of the report that I invite comments on. I'll just open it up.
Sure, this is Doug Oden. I appreciate all of the work that was done by the staff that collected and law enforcement who provided the data. It looks like it's a tremendous amount of work. I haven't heard any complaints about the time it's taken for the officers to input the data so far, so that's a good thing. I think for the report to have relevance, I think at some point we're going to have to take into account the demographics of the population when and how you compile the reports. There's an old saying, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So if you don't have the proper context with the statistics, it may not be accurate, and it may not be a projection of the real facts in the case. So I would ask us to keep working on that, so that if we have a city like San Diego where the Hispanic population is larger, then looking at the stops, you know, how does those stops coincide with the population of any particular ethnic group? So that, I think that would put the right context on the statistics. But I do commend everyone who's had a part of collecting the data. I think now it's just more of an analysis. I have no problem with the collection procedures. I think we just have to sharpen our tools in terms of the analysis. I know this is the first run, so no one's going to be perfect initially, and so no one should expect any report to be perfect. This is a work in progress, and I think it's a fantastic beginning. And I think if we keep our eye on the ball, that we'll eventually have a product that the public can accept as a very factual analysis of the situation.
Thank you. Other comments from the board?
Dave Robinson, Kings County Sheriff. Just 2 comments, and I didn't get a chance to read word by word, so I don't know if the funding issue that we've addressed over and over has made it into this year's report. I hope that it has, so we can continue to encourage the legislature and make sure they fund it. So that's great if that's in there. And then based on some of the comments this morning and public comments, I would just caution in this first annual report and being quick to draw a conclusion. I saw that a couple of times where there seemed to be conclusions drawn on some of the data already, and there's just so many things out there right now with such a short window of opportunity on data at this point to draw conclusions. And so I would just caution that where there's a conclusion drawn, that we clarify preliminary information, may suggest, et cetera, versus almost drawing an actual conclusion to some of the data at this point, because there's just, as others on the board have stated this morning, there's just so many variables right now. I would hate to see media and other entities taking this first report and taking a conclusion that was subjective and laid out elsewhere in the other 60 pages and explained. So I think anywhere there is a conclusion, there has to be kind of some messaging or information that this is really, first crack data, that we're not drawing, conclusions based on 6 months of data from 8 agencies for the entire state of California. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
Yeah, this is Oscar Barbaro. I don't know that we can draw conclusions yet, and I would echo that, but I do think we can get more data in regard to the demographics, and I would echo what Commissioner Oden had said earlier, that we need to break down the stops by the geographic areas that the 8 agencies are providing us data from, and then talk about the demographics in those agencies, in the areas that those agencies police, and draw whatever conclusions we can from those things. But to draw overall conclusions about the whole state from what we don't know is a representative cross-section of the state would be wrong. But I do think we will be able to draw some kinds of conclusions if we get more specific data and more specific demographic data, updated demographic data of each of those areas.
Thank you, Oscar. Others?
Just a quick thank you to the research team for breaking out the data, especially looking at the calls for service data. Seeing that it was 10% was a surprise to me, even excluding CHP. So I can tell you that from a professional standpoint, I'll go back to my profession and my colleagues throughout the state and encourage, as we roll this out deeper in throughout our state, that we are consistent about recording the calls for service data, so we have that data set as well. In hearing the comments about comparing against demographics based on population, I have some concerns about that, just based on the transitory nature of people commuting to work and how workforce commuters can influence demographics of a community, although they're not recorded in the demographics of the population, just as one example. So I will trust the research scientists who are much smarter at this than I to identify the context and the variables we should be looking at when comparing data as it relates to demographics.
Thank you. Other comments?
I guess I have maybe a
Yes.
specific proposal for the demographics, and I think that's a hard one, right? That you can't see what the daytime population is relative to the nighttime population. But one possibility, if we can agree on how to classify people in the census by their self-described race and come up with a schema for that, one possibility would be to do the following rule of thumb. So for the agencies that are police departments, match them to the race distribution for their city. For the agencies that are sheriffs, match them to the race distribution for their county. And then for CHP, they could be matched to the statewide, and then perhaps in the report provide the statewide race distribution and then a weighted race distribution that was proportionate to the amount of stops in this database. So there'd be a lot of it would be placed weight statewide because CHP is going to be a lot, and then attribute the rest of the weight to, so it would be reflective of who's being sort of policed within the wave one, right? And then presumably, years in the future when the whole state is reporting, then this would just revert to the statewide distribution for descriptive purposes. But so there, and I can help you guys do that, but I don't think that would be too hard, and it would be fairly easy to explain if you had statewide and then you had kind of a weighted average that reflected the agencies that you're seeing.
Thank you. Did I see another hand? No? Okay, I have a few comments myself. So one is we collect type of assignment. That's part of the data that's uploaded with the officer information. And so it would be great to see type of assignment correlated with the data. And that goes to the comment made this morning, the public comment about how we need to understand the stop data relative to the unit or the department, the activity that the officer is engaged in. So if the officer is engaged in a gang unit versus a beat, or I don't know what the assignment types are, but that seems pretty critical to understanding and contextualizing the data. That's one point. Second point is absolutely concur with the public comment about strengthening the accountability section, and we could go further to put in language about best practices with regard to accountability. And, that is the committee I sit on with Commissioner Stanley, so we'll take a closer look at that. And then the third comment is a member of the public, Karen, had an interesting idea, and I just wanted to throw it out there for your consideration. And she said, well, what if we compared this data against accident reports? And I guess there's some literature around this, and that's a sort of a random occurrence that helps situate who's in the area at a given time. So I thought that was an interesting idea, thinking outside the box. I'm sure academics and scholars can think more deeply about that, but just something to consider, because we really need to nail the contextual data somehow, some way, even if it's imperfect. We need to have some understanding of how to understand the data. Other comments from the board?
I would just like to add, I like the idea of the data, and maybe also at some point, and I know it's a long process, but at some point also including crime stat data. Mm-hmm. I think that would be super helpful as well to see those demographics on crime stats as well, cross-referenced amongst these stats and these data sets.
Any other comments before we shift gears? No? I want to commend, yeah? I want to commend the Department of Justice one more time for the enormous amount of work that you've put into getting us this far, this quickly. And this gives us the opportunity to do the deeper analysis, to think in more complex ways about the data now that you've done an initial crunch. So thank you. It would be great if we could hear more from some of your contractors. I don't know if they could come in and do a presentation at the next meeting to help us interpret the information from Jack Glazer and Emily Owens, for example. Just something for the Department of Justice to consider and for our co-chairs to consider. And with that, we are going to move in the agenda to, before we get to public comment, because we're worried about our quorum, we're going to move to item number 10, discussion and approval of new board chair. I will be stepping down as board chair, and so the board will need to elect a new co-chair to join Sheriff Robinson in leading this board. And so I will turn it over to Sheriff Robinson for this item.
Well, thank you, Ms. Guerrero. And so with that said, before we actually get to the item, I just wanted to say thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you as a co-chair, and your commitment to this is noble. So thank you very much for all your hard work. And so now we have a discussion and an approval of a new board co-chair. And my understanding, if I have the process correctly, we need to take a motion or a nomination. Nominations first, okay? And so I'll open it to the floor for nominations for a new co-chair, if anybody'd like to do that.
Well, Sheriff Robinson, I would like to nominate Sahar Durali to become the new co-chair.
Second.
Okay, so we have a nomination and a second, or a motion and a second. Do we have any other nominations? Okay, hearing none. So we have a nomination, so we can now take that as a motion. Is that correct? Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and so all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Well, very good. Congratulations. And just for the record, the co-chair will take place as soon as the meeting is over. So you'll start like at 2:05 or whenever Ms. Guerrero announces the end of the agenda today. So thank you very much and congratulations.
Congratulations, Sahar. I know you'll do great. Okay, we're going to turn to item number 9, public comment. We've already heard some public comment specifically around the stop data in the report. We welcome additional comment on stop data and on any other portion of the report. Are there things that the board or the Department of Justice should be taking into account in the next iteration of a draft of the report? And you can come forward to the microphone, state your name and the city that you reside in. That would be helpful to us. And if you could keep your comments concise.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Board. My name is Christian Burgos. I'm with Alliance San Diego, and I live in San Diego. Well, I wanted to comment that as we prepare for the release of your annual report detailing the collection of data by police departments across the state on racial and identity profiling, we're deeply concerned by the practice of using new technology such as smart street lights, which record audio and video in many of the same neighborhoods impacted by racial profiling. These new techniques pose an unprecedented invasion of privacy and could be used to undermine our Fourth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. In San Diego, this technology was acquired and installed without any discussion of policies or regulations governing the use of data produced by such technology. San Diego police have admitted to using this data in conducting their policing activities on numerous occasions and have also been given complete control of who can access the data with no oversight of public or elected officials. Alliance San Diego encouraged the RIPA board to weigh in on the use of new technology and the increase of extrajudicial surveillance that we are seeing, especially in communities of color, low income, and immigrant communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Are there additional comments from the public?
Hi, I'm Karen Glover from Cal State San Marcos. I've been kind of pondering the idea of the baseline and the bench line over the break, even though I've been pondering it for years now. Something y'all said inspired me a bit. So I'm thinking that in other situations, when we're collecting CJ-related demographics about practices in CJ, we don't focus on the spatial context. We say that for so-and-so percentage of Latinos experience this particular arrest rate in San Diego County. We're capturing people who are flowing in and out of San Diego County in that instance, and we don't focus on it. For some reason, with racial profiling and other identity profiling, we're focusing on the spatialness. We're saying there's something about the space that kind of messes with us. So I'm suggesting these imperfect measures of using census data and the other more localized demographic data might be doable. It might give a context. It's not perfect, but when I kind of opened up this idea of what do we do in other instances that are comparable, we don't focus on the spatiality of it. The second point is if you might have a plan of connecting crime rates to this racial and identity profiling project, you're conflating things. You're conflating the issue of crime with the issue of profiling and law enforcement practices, and they're distinct issues. And they can actually overlap because crime rates are in effect based upon a racialized law enforcement practice. So they're influenced by the racialized social system that we live in and other racial identities that we live in. So conflating them, I think, is problematic. The final point, if I have a moment, and it's a bit of theory, a bit of a philosophy. There's a researcher, he's been at a few different universities. His name is Bernard Harcourt, and he has a theory that racial profiling actually increases crime, that racial profiling by law enforcement increases crime, and it increases crime by whites. And so if you're looking at your hit rate data and you're finding that whites have a higher hit rate, it kind of supports what he's saying, because he's saying there's either, kind of back of the head or front of the head idea with whites that we can travel around carrying and be less likely to be detected. So it just is a little kind of context for the hit rate issue, which I don't mean to preach, but you might also be careful concentrating on hit rates, no matter who it seems to be kind of grounding, because then it opens up space to say, okay, if this group has a high hit rate, then we have some space to focus on them with law enforcement, which is against what we say we're about. It's against the issue of equality under the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? All right. Well, with that, then we will move on, and we are on track to finishing early. I want to return us to the motion that was made. We had a pending determination about whether the vote we took on the motion to recommend that the Department of Justice issue a letter in our name to the legislature to address the conflict in the complaint system. As you recall, we had 6 abstentions and 5 yeses and 0 nos, and we weren't sure what the effect of the abstentions were on that vote. So we had an opportunity to confer with the Department of Justice staff who looked into it over the break, and we now understand that we are able to take a tally of the votes that were cast aside from the abstentions. So of the 5 people who decided to vote, all 5 voted yes to the motion asking the Department of Justice to send a letter to the legislature to address the conflict that we identified between state law and the Ninth Circuit that affects the complaints that people file. And so with that, just reporting back that motion does carry, and that the Department of Justice will proceed to draft a letter that they will bring back to us at the next board meeting for our approval. Is that right? Yes. Okay. I believe that brings us close to the end of our agenda. I would ask if the Department of Justice has anything else that you would like us to consider or take action on.
No, I just want to remind everybody that that this is still a draft, and we are really interested in hearing from the public and the board. It is a lot to take in. It's a very long report so far, but please send us any comments. We have the AB 953 at doj.ca.gov email address, so that members of the public can address us, and the board knows how to reach us as well. So we're really looking forward to it, and please, send your comments.
Well, that's right. I want to underscore the importance of hearing from the public. AB 953 was created by the public. We sit here as, under the mandate of the law that the public helped create, and we want to make sure that the public is providing input at every step of the process. And so the draft report was just given to us this week. I know we're still digesting it. I know I haven't read it thoroughly, so I will be looking more deeply at it. Please take a copy home or look at it online and provide the comments that you deem necessary to the RIPA board through the website. We really do consider all of the input, and we want to make this the most effective, digestible, accessible, actionable report possible. This will be our second report. It's the first report that incorporates the stop data, and so we want to get this right as best we can.
I have one more thing I wanted to say. I wanted to say thank you so much, Andrea, for serving as our co-chair so eloquently, and your devotion to the board is unparalleled.
Thank you so much. Sheriff Robinson, is there anything else you'd like?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else any of the other board members would like to say, or, or Department of Justice?
We understand that not everyone has had an opportunity to read the report. Some of the comments that I've heard here today are addressed. If we just, and I'm not putting anyone at fault for this because everyone received it recently, but they're in there. But oftentimes, look at the footnotes. The footnotes are important. We try and provide as much context as possible, and there's a lot of the points that have been made today are addressed in the report when people get an opportunity to read it. We understand that people haven't quite read it yet, though. So.
Any other closing comments from the board? No? Well, thank you so much. We'll see you in November or at the subcommittee meetings beforehand. And we are adjourned at 1:23 p.m.